iOS 17.4 is a major update that includes more than 50 new features and changes, along with an important one that you can't even see. So in this video, you're going to see all of those new features and changes, and we'll also discuss the performance, the battery life, and if you should update or not. First off, we have new emoji. So these are some of the new emoji included in iOS 17.4 with Unicode 15.1. So some of these include a head shaking forwards, a head shaking from side to side, a phoenix, a lime, a mushroom, and a broken chain. And there's also 18 additional people and body emojis. So these guys face right now, and you can also have different combinations for the families with kids right here. iOS 17.4 includes some major changes to the podcasts application. So if we go ahead and open up podcasts, I will have 17.3.1 on the left, 17.4 on the right throughout this video. So you can see right away some changes here. So first off, in the top left, you will notice that Listen Now is now home. And also down in the bottom tab bar, you can see that Listen Now is now home in 17.4, and there is also a new glyph icon to replace the play button. And while down there, you might also notice that the Now Playing bar is more like the Apple Music style. So it's more of a floating style. It doesn't go edge to edge like it did on 17.3.1. It also has a lighter background, and it kind of just hovers in place, again, reminiscent of Apple Music. But the much bigger change here happens inside of the Now Playing view when you have a podcast playing, and you will notice down in the bottom left hand corner we have a lyrics glyph icon, and when you tap on that, that will pull up the transcripts. So now in 17.4 you have podcast transcripts that play along in real time with the person who is talking in the podcast. Very similar once again to what you see with Apple Music. And you'll notice that after it's playing for a while, you will get a little search bar that pops up in the bottom right there, and you can tap on that with an animation, and you have the option to find within that specific transcript. So if I want to find, maybe if they say sports at all, you can see it comes up 4 times, and it will take me automatically to where it says sports. And if you tap on that specific spot, it will take you to that section in the podcast and play it. And you can see this little animation here when you go out of the search section back into the full transcript right here. So that is neat. Also, if you tap on the 3 dots up in the top right, you have a new option for view transcript, where you can see the transcript as just plain text. And you also have a search button up in the top right hand corner where you can search for whatever you want, and you can see the UI. The style of this is very similar to the Safari Find on page. And the great thing about podcast transcriptions is that they can be used with accessibility features such as text size, increased contrast, and most importantly, voiceover. And then if you go into your library and go to latest episodes, you will notice that the glyph icons in the menu up in the top right hand corner have been removed, because I think before in 17.3.1 they kind of conflicted with the check marks on the left hand side. So it's more clean now in 17.4. And by the way, Apple has made the home tab cohesive throughout iOS 17.4, not just in the podcast application, but also inside of the books application. So now instead of read now, it is now home. And again, up top in the top left, you can see that change up there as well. And also inside of Apple Music. So in Apple Music, instead of listen now with the play glyph, it now says home with the home glyph. And again, up in the top left, that has changed as well. And speaking of music, if you go into the music recognition toggle and you scan for a song that you didn't know the name of, and you use Shazam to pull up this page right here, there are a couple of changes here as well. So first off, you can see that the bar is a little bit bigger here where it says music, open, and add to. The text is larger and more bold. It's also more of a white color. Also, you can see the same for top songs right there. And also the top buttons up here are now a darker color than they were on previous versions of iOS. Also, when you tap on the 3 dots up in the top right hand corner, you can see multiple changes here as well. So now it says listen in music instead of open in Apple Music. And now instead of add to Apple Music, it says add to a playlist. So you can now add to a playlist from this ellipsis menu right here. There's also add to my music and more ways to listen as a drop down right here. And you could also open it up in Spotify. Oh, and also the share button is now at the bottom, whereas before it was above view artist. Also, view artist is now go to artist. So multiple changes here in this little menu. Also in the top left, you can see it does say Apple Music up there. So there's kind of like a title for this dropdown. And if you go down to the very bottom, we have some changes here as well. So it used to say track information in all caps. Now it is no longer all caps. Same with share song at the bottom. It used to be in all caps and also bold. Now it is more normal with a less, weighty font. It's not as heavy. And then right here we have when it was Shazammed and the location. So that was not even added before on 17.3.1. And also I'm not sure if it's this song or if it's just a change, but the colors are now different as well. So it's red instead of purple, and we saw that up at the top as well. You can also now open music in Apple Music Classical if it is available. You can see right there it says listen in Classical. Before it said open in Classical and it was up top, but now music is the first option and Classical is second. Also in the Apple Music application, if you go to the top picks section or if you go down to made for you, you will see a new heavy rotation mix. Now this is a server-side update. It's not just for 17.4, but it says the tracks you can't get enough of lately, all in one place, updated daily. So it's going to take all of the music you've been listening to a lot lately, and it puts it into one playlist automatically, and it updates on a daily basis, which is really nice. And that's something that Spotify's had for a while, but now it is finally on Apple Music. By the way, if you want to get your hands on either one of these wallpapers or the wallpaper that you see on my home screen here, I will leave all of these linked down in the description below. Now, there's also been a big change for the iPhone 15 series. If you go into your settings, battery, and then right here, you'll notice that it now shows battery health and charging optimization separately. So I have my iPhone 15 Pro here on the left, 15 Pro Max on the right. This one's on 17.3.1. This one's on 17.4. You can see the difference here. Before, it just said battery health and charging, but now those have been separated. And when you went into there before, it would just show this. It would show your maximum capacity, it would show your peak performance, your charging optimization, and clean energy charging. But now, if you go into battery health, you'll notice it shows multiple new things in here. So it shows the battery health as normal. So it's going to relieve a lot of people and not make people as anxious when they go into battery and they just see normal right away. Most people are not going to go into it and check that percentage anymore. So I think this is going to help alleviate a lot of stress that people have over their battery's capacity. But anyways, also in here, we have the cycle count. So this was found in the settings general about before. And then down here, we have manufacture date and also the first use. In iOS 17.3.1, that information was in settings general about, and then all the way down here at the bottom. And also cycle count was below those two, but now it's up here. And it also gives you a little bit more information on what the cycle count actually is. Now, what's interesting here is that also underneath of battery health, we have a link right here that says about battery and warranty. And when you tap on that, you get a little kind of a snippet of a support document from Apple that tells you that the original battery was designed to retain 80% capacity at 1,000 cycles under ideal conditions. And Apple actually raised this from 500 cycles to 1,000 cycles because the iPhone 15 series batteries outperformed Apple's original expectations. So that is great to see if you have an iPhone 15 series. And if we go into the charging optimization section here, you can see there is a slight change here as well. So we do have clean energy charging down there at the bottom, whereas before that was in the main section of the battery health and charging, not inside of charging optimization. So minor change there. This update also adds a much needed change to the stolen device protection feature that was just introduced with iOS 17.3. So if you go into your settings and Face ID and passcode and put in your passcode and you scroll down, you will see that stolen device protection now has its own section. So before on 17.3.1, it was a standalone, just an on or off button right here, and you couldn't really do anything else. But now in 17.4, it has its own menu, its own submenu here. And from here, you'll notice a big change, and that is that you can now require a security delay always, not just when you're away from a familiar location. And if you forgot what the whole security delay feature is, it basically just means that like if you try to change your Apple ID password and you're away from a familiar location like your home or your work, you're gonna have to have an hour delay between Face ID scans. You have to change you have to put in your Face ID at first when you go to try to change an Apple ID password, for example, and then you'll have to wait an hour and then put in your Face ID again. You will not be able to use a password to bypass the biometric scan of your face. So that is a great way to prevent like a thief, for example, from stealing your phone and, draining your bank accounts and changing your Apple ID password, because in that case, they would have to scan your face twice over the span of an hour, and that's just unlikely. So anyways, that is when you're away from familiar locations. But if you want to change that to always have that delay, now you can do that in iOS 17.4. And this is great because sometimes certain locations would be considered a significant location or a familiar location. Like if you go to a gym every day, or if you go to a cafe every day, your phone might pick that up as a familiar location. So if somebody were to steal your phone while you were working out or while you were drinking a coffee in the cafe, your phone would register that as a familiar location, which would mean that they would not have to go through the whole security delay anymore. They would just be able to change your password right away. Now, of course, they're still going to need to have a Face ID scan, but they're not going to need that second authentication and that 1 hour delay because you were at a familiar location. Because again, on 17.3.1, you did not have the option to always require a security delay. It only happened when you were away from a familiar location. So I hope that makes sense. This is a pretty complicated, feature to talk about here. Now, iOS 17.4 is going to be perhaps the biggest iOS update of all time for those living in the EU, because iOS 17.4 introduces sideloading. So sideloading is officially live for those who live in the EU. Now, if you don't know what sideloading is, basically that means that you can install applications from third-party app stores. So that is a thing that we have always thought was never going to happen on the iPhone, but it's finally here. You could also set an alternative app store as your default app store if you would like to. Now this includes, we're going to start seeing app stores from Epic Games to install Fortnite, and you're going to see a lot more of these alternative app stores come out to those in the EU, and hopefully this does spread over to the US eventually as well. Now, sideloading is not the only thing that 17.4 adds, because there's also support for third-party browser engines. So Safari's browser engine is WebKit. We all know WebKit, but now Chrome can use its native Blink engine on iOS for the first time, and also third-party payment applications and banks now have access to the NFC chip and can offer contactless payments directly on the iPhone without using Apple Pay or the iPhone's wallet app. And by the way, if you are in the EU, this is a screen that you might see when you go to install an application. It says to verify the information before installing Google Chrome in this example. Now, something that has changed worldwide and is not exclusive to the EU is game streaming applications are now able to be included in the App Store and not just in the browser. So before, applications like NVIDIA's GeForce Now or Xbox Cloud Gaming, previously you could only access those through a web browser like Safari, but now they are able to have their own standalone app in the App Store, which could mean that you'll be able to get all those games in one in the App Store soon, because 17.4 allows for it. Now, if you go into the account section in your App Store, you will notice some changes here as well. So first off, you can see that underneath of our profile picture and our name, we now have Game Center. So that is new. And then also under that, we used to have purchased, subscriptions, and notifications, but now we have apps, subscriptions, purchase history, and notifications. So you can go into here and you can see all your apps that you previously downloaded. So before, you had to go to purchased and then my purchases, but now that is apps and my apps, and that's where you can see all the applications that you installed. And then the purchase history section is where you can see all of the purchases that you made in the last 90 days, or you could also tap on that and change it to a different date range. Now, in the intro, I mentioned how there's a big change in iOS 17.4 that you're not going to be able to see, and that has to do with iMessage, because iMessage is now more secure thanks to Apple's new state-of-the-art post-quantum cryptographic protocol for iMessage, which is called PQ3. Now, PQ3 is designed to protect against harvest now, decrypt later attacks, where a bad actor collects encrypted data with the hope of decrypting it with a quantum computer in the future. Now, the messaging service Signal previously added a very similar technique to their service, but Apple takes it a step further with what they consider level 3 security compared to Signal's level 2. Now, Apple achieved level 3 by adding a quote periodic post-quantum rekeying mechanism that has the ability to self-heal from key compromise. So think of this rekeying mechanism like a secret code that changes regularly to keep your messages safe. So if a bad guy, aka a post-quantum computer that doesn't even exist yet, if they ever figure out your old code, PQ3, the thing Apple just introduced in 17.4, will create a new code that the bad guy cannot guess from the old one. And what this means is that even if somebody gains access to your messages once via that encrypted key, they cannot keep doing it. So it's basically like having a self-fixing lock on your messages. So if all that still went over your head, just know that iMessage is about to get a whole lot more secure starting with 17.4. And iMessage was already secure, but now after this update, iMessage has the strongest security properties of any at-scale messaging protocol in the world, and that is from Apple themselves. If we head into our settings and go to the Siri and search section, you will notice that before it said automatically send messages, now it's messaging with Siri. And if you go into that section, we have a change here as well. So we have a new option down there that says read messages, and you could add a different language here. So basically what this means is that Siri can now read out messages in different languages. And this is not going to change the primary language that Siri listens to and responds in. It's only going to read out the messages in the language that you select. And speaking of Siri, the Siri or Hey S command is now available in German languages. So you can now have the option in German to just say Siri instead of the full Hey S. Also in settings, if we go down to the messages section and then go all the way down to the very bottom, we have a new section down there for messages for business. And if you go into there, there is a lone toggle for business updates. And if you have this enabled, that means that you will receive messages from businesses that you opt into to get things like order status, flight notifications, fraud alerts, or any other transactions that you opt into. Also, if you go into the contacts application and go to one of your contacts, there's a change to the contacts view. So first off, you can see that the image is a lot more compact now. So the whole section here is much more compact and the image does not take up near as much space as it did on 17.3.1. So everything inside of here is the same, but you'll just notice that the top part is much slimmer now in 17.4. I think this looks a lot better than before. And then also call identification now displays Apple verified business name, logo, and department name when available. And then if you call a contact that does not have a contact poster, you will notice that the background is no longer this ugly gray color. It's now more of a, kind of a gradient over the wallpaper that you currently have on your device. So it looks a lot better than it did previously, and that will also show on the actual phone call, not just this call failed screen. There's a new clock widget in this update, so if you go to add a widget to your home screen and go to clock, you will notice that there's a new one. Once you go over a few times, you will see that we now have City Digital. So this is a new widget. It's very similar to the digital clock that you see right here, Clock Digital, except for it now shows the city up in the top and then also the hour marker down there in the bottom. Here's what that looks like on the home screen. I like it. In the wallet application, if you go to your Apple Cash card and tap on the three dots up in the top right hand corner and go to card number, you will notice that you can now set up a virtual card number for your Apple Cash card. So basically what this means is that if stores or websites do not accept Apple Pay and it asks for your card details, you can now pay with your Apple Cash card. And when you go to set up the virtual card number and you tap on continue, you will have to authenticate yourself. And there we go. It says number added. Apple Cash will now use a virtual card number and is also available in Safari autofill. And when you go back into the settings for the Apple Pay Cash card, you will now see your full virtual card card number. So you have your expiration date, your security code, all of that. And you could also request a new card number with a tap of a button. So now if you go to buy a wallpaper pack on brandonbutch.com or anywhere else in Safari, and you go to where you need to put in your credit card information, you can see that now in Safari autofill, we do have Apple Cash there. And then if you go into your settings and go to privacy and security, there's now a wallet section right here. So before there was not a wallet section, but now it shows up right here. And it says that apps that have requested access to banking and financial accounts will appear here. And then also in this section, you'll see Passkeys access for web browsers. So if you're using Passkeys in your web browser, those will now show up here inside of the privacy and security section in your settings. There's also a few changes in the TV application. So you'll notice right away on the home screen that we now have these arrows next to up next, whereas before there was not an arrow. You can now go into a standalone section for up next, whereas before you just had to swipe over here on the home screen. And then if you go into a movie or a TV show and look underneath of the title, you can see that where it says Apple TV Plus, it now shows a glyph icon to the left of that. And that's going to show for any movie or TV show based on the application that you can watch that TV show or movie in. And there's also an arrow there because you can tap on that to go into said application. So in this example, it's just Apple TV Plus, so it stays in the app. And then as you scroll down, you'll notice some changes here as well. So again, we have the arrows under trailers, bonus content, related, cast and crew. So before it was only under related, but now you can see that we have those arrows on all of these sections. Like bonus content, for example, you can go into its own section, whereas before you just had to scroll here on the page of that show. And then also under cast and crew, the how to watch section has been revamped as well. It's no longer this big oversized card. It's just a more minimal card, as you can see right here. Oh, and then also if you go back to the Apple TV Plus tab and then go to newest releases, you will notice that the layout now matches the rest of Apple TV. Whereas before it had this dual, row right here, this dual column, and now it's just this one more minimal single file column right here on 17.4, which is what we had on everything else in 17.3. So you can see top chart movies, top chart TV shows, everything was a very similar layout, but for some reason Apple neglected the newest releases, but now that has been changed with 17.4. Small change in the Files application, the iCloud Drive glyph icon has now been modernized, so it now has the more modern look instead of the old classic iCloud logo. Now iOS 17.4 is also a big update for CarPlay, so you're most likely not going to benefit from this now, but it is laying the foundation for the future of CarPlay. So first off, if you have a car that supports the dual screen Apple Maps experience with CarPlay, you will get this new change where there's an Apple Maps option that shows information about upcoming turn-by-turn maneuvers in the instrument cluster. So it now shows it up on your gauges where your speedometer is right there. So you're going to be able to swap the display type between the main and the instrument cluster by tapping on the map configuration button in the top right of the maps screen. So that is available for cars right now. However, iOS 17.4 also introduces next generation CarPlay support. So CarPlay 2.0, which is going to launch in the US later this year. There's now 8 new CarPlay applications that are implemented in the code of 17.4. And you can see that these are car camera, charge, climate, closures, media, tire pressure, and trips. And then also this goodbye text was in the code of iOS 17.4, which suggests that Apple CarPlay 2.0 is going to show this when you turn your car off, which is going to be super satisfying because that is, of course, the same font that we get the hello on the Mac and the iPhone. And then for the developers out there, there is a new API that allows you to turn off hand gesture reactions in video calls. Now, as far as bug fixes go, we do have a few bug fixes in iOS 17.4 as well. The most notable one is the notification center bug has finally been fixed after pretty much almost a year at this point. It was introduced in June and it is now finally fixed in 17.4. And if you don't know what that bug is, take a look at the left and the right at the same time. When you go right here, you can see it's very stuttery on 17.3.1. It lags like crazy, but now that is fully fixed and our notification center is as smooth as butter. There's also been a fix for the Find My widget where sometimes the contact pictures would show up as blank. So it's not happening right now, but sometimes the picture would go blank on 17.3.1. That's been fixed in 17.4. And this update also fixes an issue for dual SIM users where the phone number changes from primary to secondary and is visible to a group they have messaged. Now, as far as the performance goes, performance is going to be better here on 17.4 compared to iOS 17.3 and previous versions of iOS 17. And I don't just mean the UI enhancements, because of course I will say that it feels better and more smooth because of the notification center enhancements and how that bug has finally been squashed. And a few other UI bugs have been fixed as well with 17.4, but those aside, the just raw performance on 17.4 also feels better and feels smoother on this update compared to previous versions. And it's not just me, several others that watch these videos have also chimed in and told me that performance is better for them on their device as well. So I am expecting a slight performance boost across the board for everybody that updates to iOS 17.4. And if you take a look at my battery life now, it is nice. And if you want to check what my battery percentage was at the start of this video, you can kind of gauge how the battery performance is here on 17.4. But for me personally, battery life has definitely improved on my iPhone 15 Pro Max, along with on my iPad Pro, the two devices I use on a daily basis. So now with all that being said, should you update to iOS 17.4 or should you just hold off? And I would say that if you're in the US or any other country aside from the EU, I think this is a great update that you should strongly consider updating to, because once again, you do have the iMessage security enhancements, you have the new emoji. You don't want to be getting those, little boxes with the question mark inside when your friends send you an emoji that you don't have because you didn't update, your software. You never want to be in that situation. So if you want the new emoji, if you want the podcast transcriptions, potentially better performance and battery life, I just think all around 17.4 is a worthy update. And then if you're in the EU, I would say that this is no question whatsoever. You should absolutely update to iOS 17.4. I mean, sideloading is one of, if not the biggest feature ever added to the iPhone. So you definitely want to take advantage of sideloading and all the other changes that you get in iOS 17.4. So I'm jealous of you guys. But with that being said, if you are more of a conservative user who likes to take a slow approach to these updates and you don't want to update right away, you don't want to get burned by a bug that may not have been discovered yet, feel free to wait. I do release an Apple Weekly episode every Saturday where I give an update on the latest software versions. So if you are a more conservative user, you might want to wait for that video just to make sure everything is running just fine. Now, as far as what to expect next from Apple, the next major release is going to be iOS 17.5. Now, Apple removed a lot of features and changes from iOS 17.4 throughout the beta stages for some odd reason. So I would expect a lot of those to come back with iOS 17.5 and future versions. Now, I would not expect to see iOS 17.5 until some point in April. So I would say early to mid-April is going to be when we see iOS 17.5. But in the meantime, we should see an iOS 17.4.1 at some point in March. And of course, the double point updates are always going to be security fixes and bug fix updates. We're not going to see any kind of, forward-facing features or changes in those double point updates. Apple typically only releases, main features, big features and changes in the single point updates, like a 0.4 or a 0.5. But of course, at this point, all eyes are on iOS 18, which will be unveiled in the first week of June, most likely on the week of June 3rd at the Worldwide Developers Conference. And that is going to be a major update, which I will be covering in depth here on the channel as usual. So anyways, that is iOS 17.4. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future iOS update videos. I like to give you guys these video notifications before your iPhone even tells you that an update is available. That is my main goal with these videos. And usually I succeed. Sometimes Apple sneaks out a notification ahead of me, but that's how it goes sometimes. But if you want to get your hands on this wallpaper and others, I will leave all those linked down in the description below. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.